Hello, viewers. I'm SB,
And I'm Amabel.
and
And today we're starting a brand new run, Disco Elysium.
she's caught me off. Listen, I'm as caught off guard as the rest of you are, but she's in charge. I guess here we go. New game. No, what's Today we're just talking about some final thoughts. I wanted to give you some time to sort of like gather and synthesize, and then come back to this. And here we are. So, Amabel.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular that you would like to you want to lead with here?
I really like this game. It's good. I think.
All right, that's it. You nailed it. We're done
I
here.
nailed it. No one's ever had this take before about Disco Elysium, this obscure game no one's ever talked about at length or in depth. This I've never played anything quite like this, and maybe that's partially just my lack of knowledge of the form of like CRPG. Is CRPG, right? Is the nomenclature?
That is correct.
And I just find it like really just really remarkable, and like I like the tone of the thing very much. I like to talk about that, especially the kind of like there's a bleakness to it, there's a grittiness to it, and there's a lot of pain and suffering in the thing, but it is ultimately, I think, like quite hopeful, quite human, quite not a cynical work, and
Okay, sure.
I find that really exciting about the thing.
See, I might take some issue with hopeful, because there's a lot of grimness in it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what it feels to me more than hopeful, not to say that you're wrong, but to say that I'm getting a different feeling.
Yeah.
What it feels to me more than hopeful is like I guess you'd have to talk about like the scope of that hope. I think that this game is not necessarily hopeful that like the whole world can be saved. But it is definitely like it is of the opinion that the world is a cruel and brutal place made so by humans, basically. It's not the world, it's humans. Humans are a cruel and brutal place. But humans are also a land of many contrasts, and there is beauty. There's beauty and wonder and love. These things exist in the world, and they are there for you to find them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I would say the game's about a lot of things, but I think it is about failure and hope. It's about having hope in failure. It's about finding love, finding friendship, finding like Kim and Harry. Oh my gosh. I the nuance and the gentleness with which that Kim's care for Harry is depicted and develops is really, I mean, it's really heartwarming, it's really touching, and it's like really well observed. Like everything in the game is really well observed. There's an eye for detail and characterization that is very precise. And I really respond to that, really appreciate that. I know in talking to you about some like AAA games, I don't know if this counts as a AAA game.
No, definitely
I don't.
not. In a huge number of ways. No, definitely not.
But like AAA games seem to have a lot of envy towards film or towards like prestige TV. It had like a lot of cinematic pretensions.
There's for sure a belief expressed sometimes unconsciously and sometimes consciously, I feel like, by a lot of AAA games that the people working on them would rather be working on a film or a TV show.
Yeah, and I'm not saying pretensions there as a knock necessarily, though often the end result is not to my liking. But what I find really remarkable here is that the game is much more literary. The texture of it is much more literary than cinematic, and I respond to
Yeah.
that really well. Like the writing is very, very strong, and like the voice carries through, and I just really respond to that really well. Like the even just the descriptions of things, which usually descriptions in books. I'm not saying I skim over them, but like after a while, I get it, George R. R. Martin. You like food and banners, right? But like the descriptions here are so evocative and so evocative of like place and character and point of view and perspective, and it's all kind of tied into like his headspace, like the mental geography. And I, yeah, this is such a really remarkable piece of work.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of this has to do with like the way that Harry is presented. Video game protagonists have a tendency not to be very complex people. And a lot of that is because they want to sort of be like a some video games want to present a sort of like a blank shape of a person.
For you to step into. Yeah.
Yeah, for you to step into, sort of a cipher for you to inject yourself into, which I think doesn't I kind of think it's a bad approach, honestly, because I understand the idea behind it that like your agency is the agency of the character, but you're from the
Yeah.
place you're from. You're the person you are. You are not a person that would exist in this place. And so I think it's I don't know, especially as far as like a role playing game goes, I think having some character is really undervalued as an approach, which sounds crazy. But in particular, if you are given a character in a game like this, uh, either they are someone who's never done anything really important, and like you're with them
Yeah.
on the first meaningful day of their life, or there's someone where like there's some kind of thing buried way in the past, but it's like cartoon apocalypse shit, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's the Planescape Torment kind of thing. Like Harry's got a checkered past in a way that's much more real and much more like painful and unpleasant to engage with.
Yes. And no
I will
matter
I will
what.
never forget. There's a bit of text that I think it's in rigorous self critique, maybe the rigorous self critique thought. There's a bit
Mhm.
of text where like it lists a couple of things Harry has done that he's really not proud of, things that he looks back on with real shame. And one of them is you kept a woman in your apartment for 15 minutes against her will. And you can absolutely like
Holding their arm. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can make sense of how that happened as a thing. Probably a lot of us have experienced a situation that was close to turning into something like that, right? During an argument or something. Um, and it's such a real thing and it's such a gross thing. Like it's
Hmm.
horrifying in a really real way that's
Yeah.
unlike the way that like usually when we talk about something being horrifying in a video game, the scale of it is so absurd that we say horrifying, but we mean it in sort of an academic sense. It's hard to feel it. This, you feel this all the way down to your spine, and it's
Yeah. It's actually like really unpleasant playing the character, but that specificity is part of like his like every version of Harry. Because you've shown me some of your playthrough.
mhm.
You of course saw the playthrough we did for your channel that where I was steering. I actually
I'm gonna be honest with
started.
you. I was mostly pretty checked out.
No, I could tell. I also started another playthrough earlier this week, and maybe we'll get into some of that a little bit. Privately. I privately did a playthrough, started one. But like every version of Harry, no matter what your stats are, is a deeply unpleasant person with basically the same past. Your awareness of it might be different, and the
Yeah,
same like
we'll come back to that
crippling
idea.
self-loathing.
We'll come back to that idea in a moment.
Yeah, and the same like crippling self-loathing, same depersonalization, which is like bones deep in the system. The system design actually like reflects the character in a very interconnected way, in a way that you can't really disentangle. And like as a piece of design, that's something that I really admire because in my work I'm always trying to find ways where the design and the theme are not like one's reflecting the other or but whether they're the one and the same thing. There's no separating them, and here it feels like one and the same thing with like no separation of those aspects, and I find that really compelling. And yeah, I think choosing to make this person an actual person, a very specific, detailed person, is a masterstroke, frankly. Because, like you said, a lot of games do the avatar thing. And I wrote about this quite a bit in the book, my book. Um, you have two general ways that games approach identity, and one is the avatar, and one is kind of a persona to try on. Like, you can express yourself through this character or that one. And those are kind of broad strokes kind of things. So something this specific where it's not aspirational, not in the least, um, I think is like a really unique approach that I haven't really encountered before.
Yeah, I wanna emphasize. I think like a bigger part of what makes it special is the sort of smallness of a lot of it, because there absolutely are
Mhm.
protagonists that are not at all aspirational in other video games. But again, it's like cartoon apocalypse shit, or
Yeah,
I'm living in a post-apocalyptic world and I killed 500 people and that gives me nightmares and my tummy hurts. It's very rare to get a thing that like brushes up against your own real world experiences and your own real world sort of sense memories in a way that it can jar you the way this game does.
yeah,
Um,
I agree with that absolutely.
I think you made a really good point talking about the way that the experience of this game is Harry's experience of this game, and the way that the UI and the mechanics and the systems are all of this character, right? You even have things like that conversation that you have with in the nightmare at the end of the game, where
Hmm.
you're talking to the Dolores that is your ex-wife, um, where like it comes out that Harry perceives conversations in this way with the lists of questions to be asked and the dialogue trees partially as a side effect of like regimenting his thinking down to his police process for so many years, but also partially because he has a very difficult time with people, and this is the way that works to make that comprehensible to him. And there is some stuff in the thoughts, in the white morning thought, which you did not get in your playthrough, but which talks about sort of Harry's depersonalization and how the only way he can be comfortable enough with the man that he is to keep being the man that he is, the only way he can be comfortable enough in his life to continue it is to sort of like put himself at a distance, to make that little man who has done those things smaller and smaller, that like justifies the viewpoint of the game. It justifies the camera as an element of Harry's world and viewpoint because of the depersonalization he has sort of forced into himself, or forced himself out of. Talking about depersonalization is always weird, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Like probably my favorite idea of the game, and one that I do not expect to see reproduced very much in other games because, well, for a couple of reasons. is this idea that like the interface with the game must be a thing of the character. It must make sense of for the character. It must be a thing that emerges naturally from the character and the way they engage with the world. And if you have a one-size-fits-all interface that you use over multiple games that take place over multiple times, like you're kind of doing a bad job. Actually, that's like some very stock workman like
Oh, for sure,
shit.
yeah.
Your interface with the world and the way you express your agency needs to be something of that character. It needs to be like a film of that character that you are pushing your hand through. And I think that we're probably not going to see it. We still haven't seen it reproduced. Like there are definitely games that want to be like Disco Elysium, right? This is a genre of thing. They try games that focus their attention in a similar way, that are very, very writerly, and that are they're trying to follow in the footsteps. But they're all going to reproduce the systems here, which are only the systems here because Harry is the character here, right? And this story is the story that's being told.
Yeah.
And you're not seeing a lot of them making great strides. But also I think Disco Elysium gets to cheat at it a little bit, because what they did was they built a character for whom the proper expression of his character was kind of the way that CRPGs work already for the most part.
Yeah.
And so they've done this thing that's kind of miraculous, mostly through sleight of hand, while not really doing a huge amount of mechanical innovation. But to make your game look like it's done the same thing, you would have to do a much greater amount of innovation, because you're going to have to do it with something different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that's really, you and I have talked quite a bit about a game that's not very similar to Disco Elysium, which is Vampire Survivors.
Yeah, okay, that's that. I was waiting to see what game it was going to be, and you got it. You're right. That game is not very similar to Disco Elysium.
But the thing about Vampire Survivors is like it has a lot of imitators now. But
Yes, yeah.
the stuff they're imitating is like the systems stuff, which is like
Well, I
not
mean,
the
not even the system stuff, but they're imitating very specifically like the moment to moment gameplay mechanics, because systems is broad, and
okay, sure.
To be precise, they're imitating the like walk around and auto shoot stuff, and to finish your point for you, because you're making a point specifically because you've heard me make it before. That's not the stuff about Vampire Survivors that's interesting at all. It's very easy to fall asleep playing Vampire Survivors. But there is a lot of cool stuff going on in Vampire Survivors in a way that maybe I'll eventually release a video talking about.
Maybe.
That is not that stuff. It is the other stuff going on, like the way the unlocks tie to the writing of the game and stuff like that. That's the stuff that's interesting. That's the stuff that Vampire Survivors does that's really noteworthy. And it's you're right. It is super frustrating to see which things get copied and which things don't. But it's just like people are doing the easy part.
Yeah, and so like because the easy part, I think, it is in like Disco Elysium. You're doing a disco like I don't know what to call them.
People do say
but
that. People do unironically say disco like.
oh, that makes me sad. Is like the mechanics, like they're interesting because they're an expression of the character, because they come out of the character. The interesting stuff is like the human emotional stuff at the heart of it, and also like the metatextual layers that come with that. Like the fact that there's even that bit where like you pass the check at some point, and you argue with yourself like, no, I passed the check, so this should work. And the game's like, no. And there's a couple moments, I think, that have that kind of metatextual layer, and it's like it's a very dense, very modern, and I mean modern in like a modernist literature kind of way, sort of thing. And I don't. That seems so hard to reproduce. You really would have to be a And if you just reduce it
Well,
down to
like
the mechanics,
the
then
critical thing is that you can't reproduce it by reproducing it, right?
yeah,
If there were
exactly.
a second Disco Elysium that followed a different character in the same world, or even Harry at a different point in his life or something, the mechanics would have to be different.
Yeah.
Like, you couldn't just make another character and give them the same 24 skills and have their voices arguing in their head. Like, you would have to make something that is an expression of that character and their engagement with the world through which to weave the player's agency. It would have to be different. You can't reproduce any of the things about this that are valuable by reproducing the things about this.
I also appreciate that the way that the character is the right character for this story. Like it's not like there's not a sense of any kind of disconnect or him being like plopped into this framework. Like everything thematically resonates, and it's like it's a very Are you familiar? Have I said that Henry James quote to you?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, this is a Henry James quote that I used to use a lot when thinking about writing and thinking about game design, actually, which is like what is character but the determination of incident, and what is incident but the illustration of character. I might have it a little wrong there, but the idea is that so incident in this sense means like plot, and it's like what is character but what happens from the plot, and what's plot but what illustrates the character. Like they're the same thing, they have to be the same thing, and this whole thing
Yeah.
as a work, as a literary work, as a ludic work, it all comes together in such a cohesive, coherent yet often very messy way. And I really love the way that um my run through of the game was maybe not, I did not 100% it. I mean,
Certainly.
first of all, it's not you're not really, you can't really 100% it because like some choices will close down other ones, and but like I like that the game makes you sit with failure. I like that the game meditates on that failure and marinates in it. And that the experience I have with the game was different than your experience. The experience that I've had so far in a second playthrough with like different stats and different choices is quite different and showing me different parts of the game. And I like that in a single playthrough, I'm never going to get the entire picture or know everything about everyone in this world, because you as a person going through the world in your day-to-day life, you're not going to solve every mystery, know everything. And I like the way that things are left unresolved. Like there was the thought about Harry's sexuality,
Yeah.
and I very much wanted to complete that thought, and the game ended before it happened. And I basically the impetus for starting another run was so I could go through and get that thought and complete it.
Okay.
But actually, my skills are such that I cannot pass the check to get the thought. My composure is so low and is capped at 1. So I'm just, I don't know, I have to start another run maybe. But I like that that's unresolved. I still want to see what comes of it, but I do like that that was unresolved. That we're only seeing a part of his life, of this story, and it has, I don't know, that kind of messy human element. You know what I mean? Am I making sense?
You are making sense.
Okay.
I do think it's sort of like to say that you like that things are sometimes left unresolved, that you can't see everything, that there's this sort of like continuity with the things before and after, and then say, so I started a new game so I could see it. These things seem a little at odds with each other.
Sure, sure. But I mean, I mean, it is, but as far as like within that one play, that one experience of engagement with the work of art, I am. This is the thing with games, like unique to games, because when you read a book again or watch a movie again, the book or the movie doesn't change. Now, what you might pick up on might change, or you yourself might change. I think I've told you before about the movie Faces, the Cassavetes film, where the first time I saw it, I bounced off it so hard, and I was like, "This film is terrible and dumb, and I hate all these characters." And then I lived a little and came back to it and watched it, and I suffered a little, and I watched this film. And I'm like, "Oh wow, this is really resonant. I really understand what the characters are going through." And I got a little bit older, and I was like, yeah, no, that was dumb. I've grown up a bit, but like the film didn't change. I changed, and the thing with a game is that even as you are changing, because every time you come back to a thing, you're a different person, right? But the game also changes.
Potentially,
You
yeah.
well, yeah. I mean, a game like this probably changes.
Yeah.
You know, these kind of narratively focused games. There's actually something I wanted to ask you about, because essentially I know, like, I was making the decisions, but you were experiencing the game with me in real time. So in a way, you had an experience with the game here,
Mm-hmm.
and you've had two experiences at least, right? But your first experience was before you figured some things out, and the
Yeah.
second one is after. And
Yeah,
so,
sort
like,
of sort of immediately before. Perhaps in the period where it might have been responsible for some of the damage.
and like how So where do you come at it, with seeing this a second time, experiencing this a second time, as it were, and comparing the two?
Uh yeah, I mean it's a very different experience on the two sides of transition. So let's just like not dance around this.
Oh, I was
Uh
trying to dance around. I'm sorry.
you are so like explicit about like an idea for a video that I'm working on that I haven't put out yet. You're like, "Hey, let's just talk about it in great detail right now." But then the thing that's like relevant to the conversation, you're like, "So you had a thought with an experience and then that was like a time." Just say the amount of the thing that you mean. Yeah, so I played the game the first time, the first playthrough that's on the channel, in which I break down crying in the final episode, if I'm not mistaken, was immediately prior to. So it was during a very traumatic time in my life when a lot of bad things happened to me in quick succession, and one of them is the ending of a very long relationship, like a 12-year, depending on how you count, whatever, like longer, but a very long relationship that had been sort of central to my life, and not just that, but other stuff, and there are elements of the game that felt very immediate to the kinds of stuff I was going through, like the conversation in the nightmare at the end of the game. It was all a little bit too close for me to. I felt like I got a lot more out of it the second time because I could see more of it.
Mm-hmm.
The first time, it's rad and I love it, and I got a lot out of it the first time. But the first time, I did definitely feel like Harry's cartwheeling is a little too close to my own cartwheeling disaster, sort of like plane crash thing. So it felt very different. In particular, the stuff about like Harry's depersonalization and the way he had to disconnect from himself as a safety measure, to sort of like protect himself from the pain that he has put himself in. It didn't strike me as being as severe during the first playthrough because that was how I was living my life at the time, and I kind of thought everybody was doing that to some extent. I did not
Mm-hmm.
realize how fucked up I was back then. Until,
Yeah.
I don't know how much of this story I've told before, and I guess I'm gonna just fucking, all right, content warning. It's in the description. Content warning, it's in the description. This is the part that the description was warning you about. I tried to kill myself not super long after that, after posting this series. There was a really grim time, or it was a lot of stuff. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but it was the suicide attempt that sort of like put me on the path to figuring things out. I was in this place where it's like, well, things got so fucking bad that like I can't live like this anymore. So either I have to stop living or I have to stop like this, right? And I will be honest with you, I definitely was thinking about this game during a lot of that, thinking about this story, and like I approached my problems differently than Harry did. But there's a lot of what happened here that I sort of like drew on as I was trying to like put some version of myself back together, with the intent of getting to the bottom of everything. Like you're going to solve this or it's going to kill you. And to this point, you've mostly been fine with or it's going to kill you. But what if we actually did the other thing? And in the process of, pulling things out and solving what was wrong, that is when I figured out my gender stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe I never would have transitioned if not for Disco Elysium. It's entirely possible. I certainly think it's one of the things when we talk about transition, when trans people talk about the things that drove the final cracking of the egg, as we say, it's usually a bunch of stuff happened, and it's a bunch of different little blows, right?
Yeah.
It's never one thing. This was certainly in there. There's a lot of other stuff that was also in there, and if I'm going to be honest with you, the video game that I definitely think is most proximal to it is Sayonara Wild Hearts, in a weird way, but this definitely was part of it. So it's like watching this back with you was to some extent like walking back over that ground, and like I don't know, in a way you could argue that there is a version of me, or a sort of a person who didn't survive the whole process. And to some extent I did feel like walking over my own grave. It was weird. Yeah. The answer to your question is it was weird.
Okay. Thank you for talking about that, sweetheart.
Yeah, you're welcome. I don't want to like bring down the mood, because like the thing is, it's not that big a deal. And I know that's a strange thing to say about something like this, where my life like completely went to hell and I almost died, but it would be a big deal if it had happened, because it doesn't feel like that big of a deal to me, I guess. And it's something I don't mind sharing. We don't have to get all serious about it.
You mentioned this, and you mentioned Sayonara Wild Hearts, and
yeah,
I think that that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, you talked about Sayonara Wild Hearts before, talked to me about this before, but it makes a lot of sense to me, those two things together, because certainly for me to figure my shit out, I needed to both see at the same time. I needed to see like the reflection of where I was and a reflection of where I wanted to be. I needed something that was like where I could identify or resonate with the pain, and where there was something that was more like hopeful. Because Sayonara Wild Hearts, like, holy shit, there's such the ending of that game is such a remarkable thing. And it's so like when you had me, this was the first game you had me play.
Yeah,
I
that was
remember
very early in our relationship.
I remember sitting on your bed. You had your laptop. You got me a controller because you know what I'm like. And I was sitting on the bed with you with the controller playing the game. And when we got to the ending of the game, and like I just started crying. It was such a beautiful moment, and I could see why that was so important to you. So I think yeah, those two games they make sense to me together because they're both games in a way that are about. First of all, they're both very singular works of art. They're very colorful, and they're both about pain in different ways and how we deal with it and how we move forward or don't from where we are and who we were. Um, so yeah, I really found this to be a remarkable piece of work and like deeply meaningful and deeply felt. And like the ending of Disco Elysium too. Like I want to talk about that. Um, Not so much like the 45-minute scene with the cops, which I guess gives like narrative closure, but didn't give me much emotional closure. For me, the high point of the thing was the phasmid, was that encounter with something that is
Well, that's the
uh,
climax. Yeah, the cops
yeah.
the cop stuff is, the falling action, denouement. The story is denouing.
Yeah, but this it's a new I mean it's that's some fucking crying hobbits a return of the king shit with like 40 minutes of that. But
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
but there's it is such a beautiful transformative moment and the sense of I don't know like it feels like that's a very meaningful encounter for Harry as a person. It feels like that's something that's going to that would change a person in some way or make them want to change. I don't know. Um, yeah, so something actually I really liked about this game is that you're handed this person where it's a very particular person. And there's a lot of things that are outside of your control as a player. There's also a lot of like you're had to remove somewhat from him. Part of that is that sense of depersonalization, and part of that is like you yourself know things that the character does not know, and like there's that kind of doubling effect.
Hmm.
But there's also the sense that because he has amnesia, and I know you've explained this is a standard CRPG trope, that you have the ability to choose who you are to a degree, and you're trying to do that during this process where you're dealing with the fallout of all the things that you've done and all the things that are reflexive to you. And that's certainly something that resonated with me as a trans person, because so much of my transition is figuring out who I am and choosing who I want to be, but there's still all this stuff I did before that happened to me before that is the reflexes that I've built, trauma responses that I've built. And I really like the way the game handles this, where you're not given complete agency, but you are given like there's that moment where you're given the option to say that you want to live, and that's like to yourself, to the voices in your head. You're, and that's such a beautiful option to have, such a beautiful choice to be able to make. Um, like a lot of parts of this game I found deeply moving.
Well, good. I'm glad that's the experience I was hoping that you would have, and part of me was like, maybe we shouldn't do it on YouTube. part of me was like, it might be too personal. After what I went through with it, like maybe it's too personal to do it in front of other people. Um, I still wrestle a little bit with whether or not I did the right thing there. But it's it's a story that can be really touching, and it does a good job of taking advantage of the agency of it, right? Of making you feel things that you would not. This story fundamentally does not work as a non-interactive work, right? It's just not. It would be not the same thing to such a degree. And maybe this is a weird time for this, but I want to go back and clarify something I said that's kind of related to this. Like, we were talking earlier about like how many games feel like they're in sort of a cinematic mode, and this one is instead, it feels more like it's in a literary mode. I want to be clear that that's not a value judgment. I'm not saying other games like movie bad because movie dumb. This game like book good because book smart.
No, I'm
they're
not
just
saying
two
that
different.
either.
They're two different modes of operation. I personally, I like film an awful lot, right?
Me too.
Well, sure, you like as an actual filmmaker and everything, but it is just it speaks to a different sort of set of priorities. It speaks to a different ideological lineage, which matters. And I think that's part of it. Part of what you're talking about comes from the choices that the game makes to be in a more literary mode. But I also feel like it does a really, really great job of taking advantage of the agency. Like, this is a thing that takes so much advantage of being a video game, and not in the way that I often talk about on the channel, where it's like, it's fucking rad that Doom Eternal just has 1-ups in it. This thing is a video game in a different way, and I absolutely love that about it.
There are ways in which it is. I mean, the game is not only using agency, but about like the agency that a single person has in this fucked up, broken world.
Yeah,
It's
like all of the communism stuff, right?
Oh yeah.
So much of the game is about communism, and you can obviously play a version of Harry who is not a leftist. And you can take on the non-leftist political thoughts, and there are quests related to the other things as well. I have no idea what those quests look like. I've literally never seen anybody do them, despite the fact that I've watched like probably 10 Let's Plays of this game.
Why would I don't understand. No value judgment, but I don't understand why someone would.
You see every once in a while, like people will post on Twitter screenshots of a topic like from the Disco Elysium subreddit, where somebody is coming in like kind of distressed, like, hey, I am trying to play according to my authentic lived viewpoints, and I feel like the game's kind of making fun of me, and what the fuck. Mostly liberals, right? Mostly people who are sort of like centrists, who would identify with the moralist forces in the game. And who just kind of haven't, in a lot of cases, who haven't thought their views through to their conclusions. And yeah, like that stuff is good, but like, even in the ways that the game allows you to be not a communist, it does so in a very sort of like leftist way, right? And the core conflict of the world, of the game world, not necessarily of Harry's story, but of the sort of like the greater narrative that we are given of how the world ended up in the place that it is in at the time that it is at, is this story about how all of these people have fought and died for this thing that's so beautiful and so worth dying for, but that nobody can seem to really articulate, and nobody can figure out how to make real, and nobody can even really agree on what it is that they're fighting and dying for. But it's still worth it anyway, because the thing is so... The thing is important because of what it means about the people who have to live under it, right? It's caring, it's love.
Yeah.
What the game does largely is it equates leftism with love. I feel like in
And that's correct.
all of the good and bad ways. And I mean, like, yeah, I'm not trying to be. You're being glib for comedic effect.
I
But
mean,
like,
I'm not. I'm being sincere.
you laughed. Come on. Your delivery, at least, you're being glib for comedic effect. It's more complicated than that, but it's like it is a sincere argument, right?
Yeah.
But
And
making
once,
you participate in these systems, like the game systems are designed such that you are likely to fail at a number of things that are very important to you, and you're likely to fail at a number of things that you should, quote unquote, should succeed at, that are very important
yes.
to you, things that are above a 50% chance, just because of the way math works. If I make you make enough 85% checks, you're going to miss some of them. Historically, you have 15% or so. And you have to feel that failure. You have to line it up and do all the right things and be working for the good and know that it is right for you to succeed and it's good for you to succeed and you should succeed, and then fucking fail and have that moment where it's like, I don't have any XP and I don't know what to do and I don't have any resources left, and how do I possibly move forward in this fucking world?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Because that's what it feels like to want better things for a world that doesn't want them, right? Like a world that seems to have no interest in betterment or love, or a place that just seems so fucking cruel.
One thing I really love about this game is the expression of that through the mechanisms and the fact that it has a point of view. Because one thing when you have in video games generally, I don't want to paint the whole space with too broad a brush, but you have like two kinds of, you have the morality of like, do you do you help the grandmother cross the street, or do you push her from a car?
Right.
And then you
The
have,
BioShock problem.
yeah, and then you have the morality of like either making sure that none of the sides are actually bad or none of the sides are actually good, the BioShock Infinite problem.
I was about to
uh,
say.
and I appreciate that
Have you
this
thought
has
about how bad it is to oppose slavery, though? Jesus fucking Christ.
And this game has like it's it has a lot of nuance to its characters and its morality without losing sight of what it believes in.
Yeah.
Without ever losing sight of what it believes in and actually believing in something. The fact that a game that is this left wing was this because this is a very popular game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just utterly astonishing to me, and makes me feel hopeful. And like, I love how I love how much hope and love and despair and sadness is baked into this thing. You
Yeah.
know,
I
it's
think that, like, one of the core messages of the game, one of the most important messages of the game, in my opinion, we're talking about my read here, I guess, but like, is this idea that there are winners and losers in many arenas of life. But the thing that's really important to remember is that winning doesn't make you right and losing doesn't make you wrong. That you lost
yeah,
just means that you lost. And I think that politically, it's a very politically it's important, and it's drawn from some very real stuff, right? Like, you identified the way that the story that we're told about the communards taking over Revachol and then being destroyed, basically, has a lot of similarities to the Paris Commune and like They're drawing on the real world history of how leftist political action has been brutally crushed or fallen apart and then been brutally crushed over history, and the fact that like it never dies out and we've never really made progress in a meaningful way, but we can't stop.
Yeah.
Because we can't stop because we know where it's coming from. We can't stop trying to help. We can't stop caring. I can't stop loving, even though most of what that does is hurt me and open me up to misery, which is powerful. It's a little scary, and the game does not shy away from that, and it can turn you into something. So like this last bit of the game, right, with the island and the dude and the phasmid.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I thought this was really interesting. It's a little bit less explicit in your playthrough. There was more of it in mine, and I'm not sure if that's a reflection of differing skill levels or differing choices made around the cryptid stuff, because I engaged with the cryptid stuff a little bit more than you did in your playthrough. Like I talked to Lena a lot more, and I got more stories about cryptids, like when Kim left to deal with the body and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But in my playthrough, it seemed a lot more explicit that, at the very least, Harry, if this was not like actual fact of the story, at the very least, Harry thought that the presence of the cryptid had been kind of slowly poisoning the murderer over a long period of time, that it had had serious effect on him. And you see some of this in like the way his eyes black out, the way he sort of like checks out of reality when the phasmid goes away. But the phasmid is this critical moment of like wonder and beauty at the end of the thing that kind of makes it all feel worth it, right? This is a story that has a lot of ugliness to it.
Sure.
And you're in this period right after all of these innocent people have died. I don't know all the different ways that the tribunal can work out, but I'm fairly sure there's no way for like some of the Hardy boys die no matter what. Right?
Yeah.
Some people who absolutely should not be getting gunned down in the street over the things that they have done are gunned down in the street over the things that they have done. And you're living in like in the wake of that ugliness and misery and the horrible, the future that is to come that is so darkened by the shadow of that thing. And then you have this conversation with this guy, and there's nothing in him except ugliness and hate, right? He was a young idealistic kid, and he was present for the loss, and it just took everything out of him. And he has spent years filling that space with just more and more bitter hatred and refusing to live because he's still fighting the fight, even though it's over, even though all of it was resolved so long ago. And that's a very fucking low moment is the point the point I'm getting to. It's a very low moment. And for the phasmid to appear, like the photograph does a great job of expressing the intended tone of the appearance of the phasmid, right? And even your conversation with the phasmid can be pretty grim, where it starts talking about the fact that the pale is expanding, and many of the clads of creatures are pretty sure that you, the humans, are destroying the world with the pale. The way things are going, it's not going to a good place. But there's this moment of beauty and wonder. This thing is just overwhelming, and it takes over all of the other stuff in the environment. While it's happening, there may as well be no other world, because it's like, holy shit, the Insulinian phasmid is real, and this is actually happening. And to what extent it's actually happening, I think I'll just say it's an Inland Empire check that starts the conversation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
There's no particular reason to think that Harry is like actually communicating with this thing. And it certainly does speak in a voice that's very reminiscent of Harry's interior voice. So,
Yeah, but
conversation in quotation marks. But in a very real way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't reduce the
exactly.
wonder of the moment, even if the wonder of the moment is brain damage manifesting. But I
And it
think
has metaphorical weight. Yeah.
it's a really critical part of the story that this guy has checked out of society and he's obsessed with the fight, and that's all there is for him. Like there's this beautiful ideal of this thing that he fought for and that he considers himself still to be fighting for. And living on the edge of this moment of wonder and denying himself reality has slowly driven him insane and left him in a place where all he can do is hate and kill.
Yeah.
Like the fact that he is closer to that moment of wonder and beauty than he is to reality, than he is to other people, than he is to love or compassion or warmth, turns him into a monster, like a horror movie ass monster. And I think that's as critical to what the game is saying as the moment of wonder itself. It's that like this thing that we're pursuing that seems not to be real, communism as a cryptid, some form of leftist government, even if you're not comfortable with like communism specifically, and certainly I don't want to get into leftist sectarianism about this, but leftist governance as a cryptid, like it's beautiful and it's probably less fake than people lead you to believe. But if it's the only thing you have, it's going to destroy you. It's going to hollow you out. Like anything that you obsess yourself with to that degree, it's going to hollow you out and leave nothing but hatred and killing. Like the thing that matters most, the way we got to this place is the need to care for each other, the need to make something better for the people around us who we see suffering unnecessarily. Our need to stop their suffering.
Yeah.
And that's got to remain the center of it, because even the need to stop suffering is a thing that can turn you into a machine of suffering if you don't ground it in love.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like that's because you have to live in the world.
Yeah.
And I really like any good metaphor, the phasmid like has multiple meanings simultaneously, because I
And
didn't pick up as
it
much.
doesn't map 100% cleanly to any one of them. And yeah,
Yes, which is what's cool about metaphors.
Right.
That's what I love about them. But like, because it's also like, I really like your explanation here of communism as a cryptid. But like, I also, because in my run there was less of a thing about, excuse me, the poisoning, the proximity to wonder doing this to him. It was less present for me. It was more like how this man's hatred and bitterness and the way he had separated himself from people made him blind, because he doesn't see the phasmid,
Right.
as far as where, so like, but both those readings work at the same time.
They're not,
Even
they're
if,
not even different, right?
yeah,
They're just focused on different parts of the same idea.
yeah, and I really love that. And I gotta say, I want to phrase this carefully. I love the explicitness of the ugliness of people in this game. As much as I find there to be a lot of hope and love and beauty in it, like the intensity of like that guy's hatred and mental illness is so unpleasant, so jarring. You know, the way he just talks about people that we've talked to and interacted with, and like, you know, Renee is. I mean, I feel Renee is kind of like an ass. You know,
Yeah, okay,
uh, and and
that's a word for it. I might go a little
and
harsher.
and certainly he and I would have very strong political differences, but like I didn't hate him. Not like I hated Trant. And the way
Well,
the guy
Trant
talked.
commits the criminal, the cardinal sin for you of just being like a really boring dude.
Yeah, actually, you know, let me swerve a bit. Hang on, let me finish my point, and then let me
Okay.
swerve a bit. Uh, but like the way like he talked about him, about Renee, about you know looking forward to killing him and whatnot. Like it's really gut wrenching because this all this person can do is seethe. You know, like he needs to log off and touch grass.
He put himself on an island where there's no grass. This is the core issue.
Yeah, but like he's looking at everything through his fucking sniper lens. He's looking through everything through like he's not seeing these people as people.
Right, like the only way he can see people is through his weapon. It's so fucking like right on his through the weapon that he picked up so he could participate in the war that he lost.
Yeah.
It's so on the nose.
But what I want to swerve to is so
How much
one
you
thing
hate
you
Trant
made
Titleston. Go.
well one thing you wanted to make sure I did not do during the playthrough was read the comments.
Yeah, not during.
Because you read you do not read the comments on your videos. I read them occasionally when the videos that you and I are on together. Um, the disco ones I did not read at all until afterwards.
Hmm.
And like, first of all, I want to thank everyone for commenting. Most of you are very sweet, and some people razzed me a little bit, said that I was a boring cop, which and that this was the most, I believe, the most mild run someone had seen of the game. And like, why didn't you talk to Trant? Well, I don't like Trant. That's why I didn't talk to him. And you know, why didn't you talk more to the union boss? I didn't like him. So the thing about the sin of Trant wasn't that he was boring, is that he was insufferable and
Sure.
smug.
Okay.
And like
Agreed.
I just did not respond to that. Like there were people I was interested in talking to, and then I ran out of dialogue options or failed checks. And there were things I was interested in, just not necessarily the things other people might be interested in. Um, I'm not trying to defend myself or anything. I'm just saying it was very strange because this is a game where there's a lot to do. It's not expected that one does everything. And like the run that I did tells a story. I'm glad I experienced this particular run, this particular story, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so maybe I was like really fixated on the filing cabinet because I think filing cabinet it told me it was so boring that he couldn't read it. And I found that really interesting. I took that as a challenge, you know?
Sure.
I don't know. But I want to thank everyone for saying nice things and um, for watching. Like I really, we've been doing videos together for a little bit now, for like a year and some change, year and a half maybe, and like I really have been. It's really meant a lot to me the way that your little community, your fan base, as it were, have been really kind and receptive to me. Um, and I just wanted to say thank you and thank them for watching me bumble through things and spend 7 episodes trying to pass a check, and it means a lot.
I also appreciate that. Thank you everyone for being welcoming, and the internet, especially like gaming related stuff, is not always the friendliest to people in general, newcomers, people who are um, maybe not the most like skilled, people who don't have like a lot of built up execution skill, and then on top of that, also obviously like marginalized people of almost any stripe. It can be a really rough time, but y'all have been very cool, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, because I'm not really a gamer.
Yeah,
I
not
play a lot
really.
of I play a lot of board games, but like I don't play a lot of computer or video games. And I don't like a lot of the like you explained to me a few weeks ago what a tooltip was. I had never heard of that before. And like this is a lot of things I just don't know. So I appreciate people being patient, kind. Um and Yeah, I really enjoyed going through this with you. And I'm kind of upset that there are disco likes because
Yeah,
like
but
I
but only sort of, right? Because like I said,
yeah,
they're emulating the specific things about it rather than what those things mean, and so in that way, they're very undisco like.
because I would really love another experience like this. Like this and Pentiment were like the two things that we've gone through together that that I've gotten the most out of and found the most interesting. But there isn't really a lot in that space where it's like the RPG elements without like combat or without it getting too much into visual novel territory and also having like I don't know. I really enjoyed this experience, and I'm kind of sad that it's done. But maybe that's why I started a new run. It's just like I didn't want it to be over necessarily.
Sure, I
You
can see
know.
that. I think we're this has gotten pretty long, longer than I thought it was going to be. And I think we've said a lot of valuable things, and hopefully y'all agree. Patreon.com/SB makes games. SB plays games? SB makes stuff. It's one of those. It's in the doobly doo. Go check it. But before we get out of here,
You
and
gotta work on your Patreon plugin, sweetheart.
I don't pitch, all right? As we all know, traditionally I am a catcher. So there's one thing I wanted to go over though before we bail,
Yeah.
and I'm going to push us a little bit on time here. Um, there was something you said earlier about there being the elements of the story being static, and maybe you don't find out about them, but like one thing that I think is kind of interesting about this game, and a thing that was a little divisive on release actually, is the fact that it's not really a murder mystery, and that like there's no way to figure out who did it. Who did it almost doesn't matter. Right? It's almost irrelevant except for
Hmm.
thematically, and it doesn't. There are video games that are designed to be mysteries where you try to figure a thing out. And a way that a number of them have tried to maintain some like function to the mystery even is to make the actual answers different from playthrough to playthrough. Like famously the Blade Runner adventure game from like the 90s,
Hmm.
different characters are replicants on different playthroughs.
Okay.
You have to actually there are ways in which that is kind of missing the point, because like part of the mechanics of that game is that the Voight-Kampff test allows you to tell who's a replicant, which is kind of not the mechanical or thematic function of that machinery in the world of the story. We don't have time to get into a whole thing about that. But my point is, like, there are games that are about solving a mystery, and this game is not one of those. This is a game where there is one particular thing that happened, and you can't figure it out, and it kind of doesn't matter. And it is the same from playthrough to playthrough. The underlying elements of that plot are the same from playthrough to playthrough. But I wanted to ask you actually
Mm-hmm.
about what you think it means to not experience something as part of the story. So, like, for example, this
Mm-hmm.
is something I brought up to you just before we started recording. There is a plot thread, and it's a little buried, and it's very easy to get through the game without ever seeing any of it, which you absolutely did. But there's a
Mm-hmm.
plot thread that suggests, or perhaps objectively confirms, that Harry is a corrupt cop, and that he works as basically an enforcer for a organized crime figure in the setting. And that's part of the reason that some people in Jamrock know who you are, because you have a reputation as the guy who this mob boss sends in to find out what happened in a situation. La Puta Madre's can opener, which is, him being called that's a whole other thing. But the fact that plotline didn't exist for you, like, what do you think that means that that's not true in your version of the story? Or, like, how do you take that there's this whole thing that just doesn't come up at all in your playthrough? What does that mean for, like, the narrative as you experienced it? If I never told you about that just wouldn't be a thing that's true for you, right?
I mean,
This is just
yeah,
curiosity. I don't have a
yeah.
point here or
If
anything.
if I hadn't found out about it, then yeah, it would not have been part of the thing for me. But
Because this is a thing that's quite different about video games as a narrative
yeah,
medium
absolutely.
than other narrative media. Is it's not possible to not get parts of the thing, even if you don't understand some piece of subtext in a film or whatever. It's still there. Right?
Yeah, there's a really good video essay I saw about this. um, yeah, no, it's something I think about a lot. Now, granted, like in my own work, in board games, we don't have the same kind of narrative structures necessarily that you get in video games. But I still think a lot about like what is an experience of a game and what is like a canonical experience, or does one even exist?
Yeah.
And yeah, I the question of like what is true within the game, within the playthrough, within the world of the game. I think it really does depends on how you engage with the media. Because if I just engage with it as that as that single experience without you telling me anything, without me after the fact looking up anything or starting a second run, um, like that would be my conception of it. Does that change what's true in the world, or just what my character is aware of his past? I don't know. Like one thing that people pointed out that I missed, they pointed out in the comments, was most of the stuff about the Pale. Like I got hints about the Pale, but I didn't get like the big plot dump from Joyce
Yeah.
in the playthrough around the channel. I did get that on the second playthrough, and like it adds a whole nother layer to the thing that I would have found quite engaging and quite ominous, and would have like folded in with all that stuff. And in a way, my run is lesser for not having that, but then that's also just kind of like the smallness of the world and the character. So like, I don't know. I think part of the thing too is like how I engage with media. Generally, what I do when I'm not playing a game on your channel is I read everything I can about it before, or even instead of engaging with it, and while
Yeah.
engaging with it. Like I'm someone who's very much interested in like all the extra bits and stuff. Not in a world building go to, the Disco Elysium equivalent of Wikipedia, for example, which I'm sure exists. um, but more in the sense of just like part of engaging for me with a work of art is knowing about its creation, knowing about its influences, knowing about the things I may have missed, or what my choices are and the ramifications of those choices, which would be counter to the spirit, I think, of playing this thing. So I definitely am glad I had this experience where I then can come to it after. I'm not sure I'm really answering your question because it is a complicated question of like what is the experience of an art
Yeah,
when
I
the
did want
experience
you
is
to,
different.
on the way to the answer to my stupid question, I did want you to really quickly nail down what is the meaning of art, what is the authoritative sort of like experience of a piece of art, and in what way does that compare to the body of the art itself, and kind of to some extent just sort of like musings on the nature of human perception in the world.
Yeah,
Go, guys.
I really fucked it there. But
It is
it's
a nightmare question. I apologize. I apologize for
no, it's
having asked it.
okay. And
You should not have even attempted. Um, but it is like I think that there's a certain way of looking at art, which is that like a person's experience of a piece of art is all that can be conclusively said to be real in the first place, right? If you want to get into some like cognitive theory, like how can we know that things? How can we know of things of outside that are outside of ourselves? We have only like the evidence of our senses and like so your experience of a piece of art is the thing that matters, maybe in a less dramatical way than the way I just described, but like I think that makes a lot of sense still. Your experience of a piece of art is the thing that matters, and you can't experience art without taking it through your own lens, which is not just like the literal evidence of your senses, but it's also the feelings that it triggers in you, which are built up out of decades of other experiences. As an example, perhaps the first time I saw Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I had just gotten out of a very difficult relationship with a girl who was quite similar to Clementine, and it was a very stressful and pretty abusive relationship, and I stress vomited about halfway through the film. I had to run out of the room and vomit. Does that mean that Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a movie that makes people vomit?
well, I certainly did, but for different reasons. Uh,
So, like, a person's
yeah,
personal subjective experience of a piece of art is the only thing that is real for them, and also a thing that's like almost certainly going to be very different from any other person's experience of that piece of art. And there are a lot of complicated decisions, a lot of complicated conversations to be had about what that means for a piece of art when the piece of art itself is the same to each person who sees it, in the case of, a painting or whatever. But I think we get an extra layer of complication with that stuff in video games, where what you experience with your senses is not the same as what another person experiences with their senses
yeah.
of it. The playthrough I had is so different from the playthrough you had in so many ways, and what are the facts of any of that is a thing that you kind of have to decide on before you can talk about how the facts affect you, and that means to a certain extent that any kind of discussion of art is meaningless. So I guess that's where we say goodbye. None of this was worth anything. Haha, we got you. I don't know. It's a really
Or
complicated set of
or
questions.
just like love, we can't agree on it, but we
And
know it's worth looking
we
for.
can't prove it's real. But it is the only thing that matters. Except
Yeah.
that the worst thing you can do is treat it as the only thing that matters, because it's important to have a lot of different things matter.
And scene.
And see. So that's going to be it for us for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I just wanted to talk about Disco Elysium a little bit more with
Yeah.
a person in my life who I think is really smart and has a lot of interesting things to say about art.
And they weren't available, so you had to use
And
them.
they weren't available, so I had to settle for you. I do want to say one more thing. Sorry, I pulled up the credits slate, but let me go back to the thing here. Amabel, we've been sitting and looking at this for 80 minutes.
Okay.
Do you recognize this? Do you understand what this is?
Is I mean, that looks like the church.
That's the church. Okay, this is a little bit unfair of me to ask of you because I know you have difficulty with the sort of like constructing 3D spaces and manipulating them in your head. But like, that's the church, that's the boardwalk, that's those green like market stands, that's the Wumpty Dumpty Dom Center, fucking Trent Hiddleston town. You can see the exploded statue of the horse sort of sweeping to the right across center screen right now. Over here to the left, we have these clusters of buildings. There's the jetty where Joyce's boat was docked. This is a view of the setting of the game specifically from that sniper's nest position.
Jeez.
It's like we're laying on the mattress. That's the way they introduce you to this. And that helps to contextualize, like, to some extent, the thing we're seeing in the sky and beyond the world is the pale. But also, to some extent, it is the way that it still appears from this place through the eyes that see it from this place. I just think that's neat. I don't really have anything else to say. I just think that's neat. Anyway, actual end credit stuff. Thank you all so much for hanging out. I hope that this was interesting or valuable to you. If it was, www.patreon.com/sbneedsdollars. It's in the thing. Everybody who's watching this, they know it's in the thing. When you come back, you have something else?
When we come back next time, we're gonna play something different.
Oh, you're just gonna do my outro for me? Okay.
No,
that's rad. I can start taking a break right now. Go for it.
So we're gonna play something different because she always has me on a series, and I'm actually not sure what that is yet. She's not telling me. She's keeping it a secret. I hope there's a hat in it. I'd really like it to be like a really nice hat.
I'll just say this: it's really gonna steal your heart.
Wait, what?
It's gonna Godzilla Voxel Wars your brains out. The joke was I was gonna tease like it's any of the things that we've talked about and said we'll come back to, when in fact it's not any of those things. Okay, that's the core joke. So come back for that and we'll see you then.